Hi there, I'm Peter Millard, and in part 4 of the Tracksaw Workshop, I want to talk to you a little bit about dust collection and dust extraction, about repeatability and consistency of those everyday cuts. That's coming up next. So yeah, we've got some good stuff coming up, but before we get into that, I just want to go back to part 3. I was talking about doing a test to make sure that the saw was cutting perpendicular, a nice straight square edge cut as it plunges, and I realised that I neglected to mention what to do if your saw isn't making those cuts. If it isn't cutting square, if it, on a higher end saw like the Festool and the Maffel, you can just see it on this Festool here, there's a little grub screw that you can change the angle of the base of the resting point of the bevel slightly, and basically you tweak that and redo the test until you've got it cutting nice and square. On the cheaper saws, certainly on this one, you still get those little grub screws, but the manual says it's a return to a service agent to have those done. They are supposed to be set at the factory as dead square. So if it's a brand new saw like this one, just chuck it back to the dealer, chuck it back to whoever you bought it from and get a replacement. It should be cutting square and true straight out of the box. If it's sort of 6 months into the warranty, then provided you can live without it for a week or two or however long it takes, then just return it to the whatever service agent they recommend. On the Aldi saw, it is a return to Shepak. As with most of their tools that are rebadged Shepaks, Shepak deal with all the customer service side of things, possibly including returns. So yeah, you might be talking to them anyway. So before we get into today's main topic, I just want to have a quick chat about dust collection and dust extraction. Those two phrases are often used almost in the same sentence, but they mean quite different things. Dust collection implies the sort of passive collecting dust that is expelled from the tool, whereas dust extraction is much more active. You're actively pulling the dust, you're extracting the dust out of the tool. And depending on which tool you end up owning, they have varying degrees of success of expelling the dust from the tool. Very generally speaking, the more expensive higher end tools like Festool and Maffel will have much better design internally, so they use the rotation of the blade and the expelled air from the motor to actually expel the dust down through the dust port, and having an extractor attached is almost like a bonus. If you put a hose to the higher end saw and run them without the extractor, they will actually fill that hose up, whereas if you put a hose to an entry-level saw like this one and don't use an extractor, it'll just sort of spray dust everywhere. So these, especially the entry-level tools, are very much designed to have dust extraction, and it does feel a little bit weird having a hose attached to your saw like this, but you will soon get used to it, and it does make a big difference both to your working environment, to your general health and well-being, and also to the health and well-being of the tool as well, because you're increasing the airflow, you're taking the dust away, and you're making everything sort of cooler and better cooled, so that you will generally get a better cut and your tool will probably last longer. As I say, it does feel a bit weird to start with when you're attaching an extraction hose to your saw for the first time, but you will soon get used to it. If you can't use an extractor, then working out of doors is probably your best bet. There are some tools, incidentally, particularly the cordless plunge saws that we're seeing now, that are designed to have a passive extraction, so just a bag attached to them. You don't see many saws that are mains powered that will have a bag attachment. There's a few notable exceptions. I think Triton is one that does a bag for their mains powered plunge saw. But moving on, let's get into today's topic, which is repeatability and consistency of cuts. So we've got our saw working pretty nicely. Guide rails are all trimmed back. You can put a couple of pencil marks down and cut to that line pretty consistently. In fact, consistency and reliability and repeatability are two of the key things to any kind of woodworking project. You've got to be able to cut that piece of wood the same time after time after time. You can work to a pencil line pretty easily. So say if you're ripping strips of 300mm off a full-size sheet to make a bookcase, you can do that fairly easily. But making those cross cuts, cutting those all to length, let's say you're making a bookcase, you need 2 longish sides, but then you need all the shelves, and they've got to be repeatably, consistently all the same length. How do you do that? Well, these days I do that with this. This is a Festool MFT, or multi-function table. It's a very clever, very sophisticated piece of Festool engineering. I managed to pick this up used a little while back. They are very versatile and incredibly useful, and not at all cheap. Now, I've had one of these far longer than I've had a table saw, but before then, what did I use? Well, I used to use a jig, and I'll show you how I make it. So I've made a couple of crosscut jigs before in a few videos. I did one in the Shells for Tools series. I didn't go into a great deal of detail on that one. And I did one in the Tracksaw Chop Saw video. I went into a great deal of detail on that one, but that was very specifically something to use on site for trimming small bits of trim and architrave. For this more sort of general purpose one, you want a baseboard or a spoiler board, and you need something like, well, I'd recommend something like sort of 600 by 1200 mil, about a quarter sheet of whatever. MDF is perfect for this. 6 mil is perfectly thick enough as well. You're going to need a couple of strips of, again, something 18 mil. MDF is ideal because it's reasonably straight and stable. And again, a straight edge is always a useful thing to have. You'll need a couple of little blocks, again something like MDF in 12 mil. The fences, by the way, need to be about the thickness of the thickest material that you're likely to want to cut. You can go deeper, but not much more. So if you're going to cut a lot of 25 mil, make these out of 25 mil, for example. You'll also need a known square. You'll need your rail, of course, and you'll need some double-sided tape. I'm just putting this together with tape because it's not designed to be permanent. Obviously, if you want it to be a permanent fixture, then use some epoxy or adhesive or whatever else. But a bit of double-sided tape in there is a useful thing to have, just to hold things together while the glue dries. So with the decks cleared, I'm putting double-sided tape on the top and bottom fences and pressing them firmly into place with the help of a straight edge to keep everything aligned. I'm adding double-sided tape to the rail stops, and with the rail in position and square against the top fence, I can fix them down. I'm making a test cut on a piece of scrap. Note how I'm cutting through both the top and bottom fences as a reference for the cut line, and then I'm checking the cut edge for square. And that's pretty much our little cross-cut jig sorted. If you're going to move it around a bit or cart it around, I'd recommend securing the top and bottom fences with some staples or a few pins, and ditto the little stops that the guide rail bears against. But it's very easy to use. You know exactly where your cut line is going to be because of the initial cut. You can clamp a stop, or in fact just use a clamp itself against the top rail to give you repetitive cuts. And you can just use that all day long. It's a simple, cheap and effective cross-cut jig for repetitive, consistent cuts. Now this is running a little bit long, so I think I'll end this one here. Join me in part 5, where I'll be making some parallel guides that work both for regular repetitive rips as well as narrow waist side cuts. But that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.